Backyard Farmer from State Fair in Grand Island. I'm your host, Kim Todd. We are so glad you could join us for another hour of answering all of your great gardening questions. Since we are at State Fair, unfortunately, that does mean this is a taped show. That does not mean you can't send us your question. You send those as JPEGs if it's a picture to byf@unl.edu. Please give us as much information as you can, including where you live in the state, so we can give you a good answer. You can always follow us also on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and all those good things. So as always, even though we are out here at State Fair in front of a live audience, we start with samples. And Jonathan, you have a critter that is trying to escape.
Yeah, they don't want to be my friend right now, apparently. I brought a couple of cone-headed katydids with me here today, so named because they have a really nice pointy head. There are a few different species that we can find here in Nebraska. I've got one that's a sword-bearing katydid and another one that is the false round-headed katydid or something to that effect. They're not a big pest. They're part of Fred's wondrous pageantry of nature. They're just interesting parts of the summer. They make a lot of cool noises. Sometimes if you have a certain species, it sounds like they're saying katydid, or katydidn't. And that's how they got their name. But the male is making that noise to try and entice a female over to him. He rubs two parts of his wings together and it makes a loud trill. They usually appear in the latter part of the summer and they get active in the late evening, early nighttime. So they're just part of that cool sound that you hear at night. And I've always thought they were pretty fascinating. They're kind of camouflage, look like a leaf almost.
They are beautiful, and
Yeah.
some of us are old enough to remember the cone heads on Saturday.
I was going to make the reference, but
You're not old enough. All right, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, Bill, tiny little piece of not good grass.
Yeah, this is a grass that I'm seeing a lot, getting a lot of calls about recently. And it's a disease in Kentucky bluegrass lawns that's usually kind of isolated and limited to golf course putting greens and fairways, called dollar spot. It's called dollar spot because in that golf situation, it will grow to be about the size of a $50. But in a lawn, it might be 2 to 4 inches. And what you'll notice on these bluegrass and fine fescue lawns and perennial ryegrass lawns is that the grass kind of has this sunken white color. And if we look really closely at some of the leaves, we'll notice that it has kind of like a whitish color in the middle. And then it's kind of girdles and shrinks down, has an hourglass appearance. So when we see that, we know this is dollar spot. It's a foliar pathogen, so nothing really long-term damage from dollar spot. I wouldn't recommend controlling it, but with the weather we've had, with the high humidity over the last 3 weeks across much of the state, we're seeing a lot of it. If you really want to control, a lot of the fungicides you can get from any kind of garden center will be effective at controlling this kind of rare lawn disease in dollar spot.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, a tater.
Tater. We're in the process of digging our taters. So what I have today is corky scab, where there are several different scab species, but they are very similar. If we take a look at this one, you're going to see the corkiness on it is that brown discoloration on there. As the name applies, it looks like cork. That's right on the surface of the potato. If I turn it around, it can look like little dots, sunken in areas. So this is favored in the soil, of course, since it's a tuber. It's one of those diseases, once it's in your soil, it's always in your soil. It doesn't really hurt your potato. If we would take my fingernail, I'll take it on this spot right here, and you scratch it fairly decent. You see how the cork came off. So it's very superficial, so you can eat it. If you don't like it, you can peel it right off. Management for this disease, we can do some resistant varieties, but they're really hard to find as a homeowner or a home gardener. The commercial guys are able to get it a lot easier. There's some tricks if you look online about increasing your water, so it's really water, but depending on where you're at in Nebraska, we've had a lot of water this year. But if you get it too wet, then you set yourself up for other tuber rots, and they really stink, the bacterial rots, and that actually causes more damage to your tubers. So most of the time, you're just gonna live with it and peel it off. Otherwise, for my family, we eat the scabby, corky part, and it doesn't hurt us one bit. So corky scab.
Sour cream on it.
Sour cream on it makes everything good. And some bacon bits, very good.
Oh, on that note, Elizabeth, what do you have for your sample?
What I have a couple of different ornamentals. A lot of people think that these are a grass, but these are actually a sedge. And one way to tell the difference between a sedge and a grass is the grass will have the joints on it. The sedges will not have any joints on it, and sedges have edges, and so this is a triangular shaped stem. So this is a giant sedge. It's called king tut. Some people call it king tut grass. And then we also have the little one, which is baby tut, hence the name. Look at that. So the reason I pulled these is because all around the fairgrounds out here, there's a lot of great containers, and some of the containers are going to contain this king tut or the baby tut grass. And what they do is, you've heard of the thriller, the filler, and the spiller. Well, these guys are definitely a thriller. I mean, they're about 4 foot tall. If I stand up, it comes up to my hip. Think about those in a very large pot. If we're doing containers, we do about, 2 times the height of the container. So if you've got a really tall pot or container, you know, the king tut can really add a lot of drama to that. The baby tut is also just a fun one that you can have out there. A unique form, looks like yellow nut sedge on steroids is what it comes down to. But some really unique plants that we can add to our containers, especially for some vertical elements in there.
Excellent, thank you very much. All right, gang, we're going directly to pictures. Jonathan, we had within about 3 days, 3 different viewers from 3 different parts of the state send us pictures of this beastie. This one's from Fairbury, 1/2-inch boxy beetles eating the crop of tomatoes. Right. Just as they're getting ripe and they're all munching away. She thinks it's too late for that tomato, obviously, as does everybody else.
That one.
So what is it and what do we do about it?
These are Bumble flower beetles, so named because they're kind of hairy and they look a little bit like a bumblebee. They are a scarab beetle that flies close to the soil of the surface of the ground. And when they fly, they make a really loud buzzing noise like a bumblebee. We usually think of these as scavengers. They're feeding on things that are rotten and fermenting, fruits and vegetables. They will find wounds on trees and eat the sap that's coming out of those wounds. So we don't normally think of them as a primary pest. My guess would be that they found some tomatoes that were a little over-ripened or even had a crack in them, and those tomatoes were susceptible to the feeding by this particular insect. So they came in, they're gonna hollow it out, they're gonna eat everything they can, but they're not gonna get onto the tomatoes that you still want to eat. So one solution would be to harvest right before ripening. That way the tomato isn't soft enough for them to try and do some crack protection, use those crack sprays that some of the horticulturalists talk about, or look into maybe trying to just knock the beetles off and venture into the world of eating saliva from a beetle on your tomato.
That's not a very palatable
No, probably
thought.
not. Very, no.
Not going to happen.
No, probably not.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so this one comes to us from the Niobrara River.
Okay.
And they purchased this property, Bill, have sandburrs and puncture vine, wondering about the best way to get rid of those.
Yeah, so the puncture vine isn't too difficult to control. Honestly, a lot of our herbicides are effective at controlling this particular pest. It's a real pest if you're a biker or you play in the grass. Same thing too with the sandburr, but the sandburr is a little bit more difficult to control. It's going to require a little bit more specialty herbicides. Things like Pilex for tenacity are some of the few herbicides that can work post-emergence to kill off that sandburr. So if you see sandburr issues, one thing you can think about doing is using a pre-emergence herbicide. Most of the pre-emergence herbicides you'd use for other grasses, like crabgrass, are going to be effective for that. And then if you see this sandburr start to come back up, maybe you contract with a professional that has access to some of those, especially herbicides, and see if you can get control that way.
And pick the burrs off your dog and out of your socks before you spread them around the yard.
Yeah, that's how it disseminates the seed, is those little burrs. So.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, Amy, we have, I think, about 3 pictures here from one viewer and another from a second, and they're all Forsythia. They were seeing some wilting happening, some strange sorts of appearances of the Forsythia itself. The first set here, they say this is in full wilt mode, does not want it to spread to others in that particular area. And I think your other one is kind of the same situation. We're seeing some wilting and some dieback on Forsythia.
Typically, Forsythia don't get a lot of diseases, but depending on where you've been out in the state, I would be really concerned about a root rot, especially if you look in this picture how it's really wilting, like it has too much water, or some ways it looks like it's dry. So one thing I would do is pull back at that crown of that Forsythia, take a look. How wet is your soil? Is it saturated? If it's been Mother Nature, it's hard to remove that moisture. I understand that, but if you've been getting a lot and you have a really thick mulch around that Forsythia, you need to pull some of that mulch back to allow an opportunity for that crown of that Forsythia to dry out. As you're pulling that soil back, if you look at that crown, if it's really black or slimy brown in coloration, you have a major crown rot. Will the Forsythia recover from it? It's really hard to tell at this point in time, because once that fungus is in that crown, it's going to affect the movement of all the water and nutrients in that plant, and that's the baseline for the plant almost. So it'd be one of those situations you're going to have to sit back and watch it, pull back that mulch, try to dry it out as much as you can, and see how well your Forsythia comes back next year. You may be in a situation that you're going to have to replace that Forsythia next spring if it doesn't come back real well.
All right, thank you, Amy. All right, Elizabeth, you have a couple of tomato questions that are related, and one that is tomatillo, which is a little different. So your first couple, the first one here is this odd form of the tomatoes. And this is a Lincoln viewer, and he's saying the green part won't ripen on this one. And then the second picture of tomatoes is something he's called Christmas grapes, which I think are the little ones, and he's getting doubling on those. So there's our little Christmas grapes. So what's going on with either one of those before we move to the tomatillo question?
So for the first one, it's a condition called green shoulders, oddly enough. And no matter how long they wait for that, that's going to continue to stay green and it's not going to ripen. And so with green shoulders, oftentimes it's just one of those things that we'll see commonly in heirloom varieties. Oftentimes we'll see it on those tomatoes that are left either in the sun or maybe there's not a lot of full canopy cover over the top. But once you see it happen like this, there's not a lot you can do other than cut the green part off and eat the red part. It's kind of like blossom end rot. Once you see the damage, it's already too late to do anything. And like I said, it's mainly varietal. Same with the Christmas tomato with the splitting and the weird shaping. That's just the way the tomato formed after it flowered. And so there's not a lot you can do for that weird shaping of that tomato. It's just the way that the tomato was formed after it was flowered. And so it's kind of fun to see those types of odd shaped fruits. But with the green shouldering and the odd shaping, it's just enjoy them. Cut off the parts that you can eat and discard the other ones that you can't.
All right, and the tomatillos is a little different situation entirely, because this viewer is actually a Lincoln viewer. She said that they're not really filling out well. The husks turn yellow, they fall off before anything ripens, and then they have these dreadful looking gnarly growths when she pulled the tomatoes up and looked at the stems. And I mean, it looks just alien.
And I think it looks super cool. Because what it is tomatoes and tomatillos, they're both related. And so what happens with those types of plants is they can easily go ahead and make advantageous growths and roots on the stems directly. And so what happened in this instance is the plants were planted so close together that there's so much humidity that plant started making advantageous roots on that area. And so with that advantageous growth, again, nothing you can do, but just enjoy it. I think she did end up ripping them out, but it's just try again next year, maybe add some spacing in between them, and hopefully they don't decide to root everywhere on their stem.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, the fair and 4-H have always had a great relationship with one another. All those youngsters bring their livestock, bring their produce, show it, get that great experience, hopefully be able to take some of those on to state. We went to take a look at just exactly what happens to get all of those sort of great gardening things ready that those youngsters bring to the fair.
As a gardener, as a master gardener, we're always excited when young people care about gardening, being outside as much as we do. We want to cultivate that as both as a job or a profession, as well as a hobby. that can provide lifelong enjoyment.
4-H is like where people enter, like what they make and like stuff into the to the fair, and they like get ribbons, and it's fun to see what everybody else makes. My favorite part about being in 4-H is getting to make many things for the fair and getting to see how well I've done, because I'm always really proud of my work and I like to see it where everyone can see it and I can be proud of it.
Well, my family's always been a gardening family. We've always grown our food, had fun doing it. We normally pre-seed. My aunt started that tradition. She pre-seeded and we put those in our garden. And we had a very great year of it, and my mom started seeding her herbs. She would have used this to make her pesto, our family recipe. But I decided to enter this in the fair, so it looked good. I loved the leaves on it, so I decided to try it this year.
You know, it's a really neat process because they get to plant the seeds, grow the plants, and then harvest either their flowers or vegetables. And then they look for uniformity when they bring it to the fair. They want all the vegetables to look the same size, same maturity. And then they have an option to interview judge and talk about what they've learned through the process.
And you do really fun activities, and then you can enter into the fair and go, if you do a really good job, you can go to state, and it's just really fun.
4-H is a place where you can make new friends and do different contests, and you can learn new things, and it's just really very fun.
You meet new friends. You get to have new people with you in your life. They taught me tons of tips. I learned a lot more than I would have known this year without them.
4-H gives the kids responsibility. They learn how to manage their time, take care of either their vegetables or their plants, their house plants. They learn how to harvest, and these are lifelong skills. Gardening is a lifelong skill for them.
We have a great audience out here live at State Fair. It's really fun to see the audience, and it was fantastic to see those kids showing their produce, being so excited about it, learning about gardening. That will be the future panelists on the show and our master gardeners helping us in the state. All right, Jonathan, on that note, we have insect ID.
Lay it on.
The first, you have two of them here. The first is from Emerson, Nebraska.
Okay.
And she called this an ugly worm.
What? It's not ugly.
For an entomologist, it is a fabulous looking thing.
Yeah.
So what's this first one?
This is a question mark caterpillar. Question mark butterflies are famous for having sort of scalloped wing edges, and on the outside they're kind of a brown camo color, and on the very back of their wing there's a silver area, and it looks sort of vaguely like a question mark. That's how they got their name. As a caterpillar, they feed on elms. They'll also feed on nettles, and they're kind of becoming a pest in hops. If you ever try to grow hops, you may deal with quite a few of these question mark caterpillars.
All right, and your second one, actually, they said they got attacked or saw a huge swarm of something coming out of the neighbor's grass that they couldn't identify. They did identify this, so it's a double question. They didn't send us the question about the stuff coming out and flying around. They want this one identified, and the stuff that we don't have a picture of.
Okay, so I would imagine that they are pretty much intrinsically linked. This is an alate ant. It's a winged reproductive ant. When ant colonies reach maturity, they will send out new queens that have wings and males that have wings. This one looks to be a new queen, and they will mate in a big swarm. It's like a big old party. Everybody's having a good time in a big cloud of ants, and it sounds like they kind of wandered into it with their backyard good times, and they caught some of these ants. So it's probably a citronella or maybe other kind of Lasius neoniger ant, but it's not a big pest. Don't have to really worry about it. It was just kind of out there flying around.
Other than the swatting that.
Yeah, I guess you could swat at them, but you could just join their party and have a good time.
Right. That'll work too. All right, Bill, you actually had from 3 different viewers, 2 of whom sent pictures. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And we got a series of pictures, starting with the broad view. They want to know what this is and how to manage it this time of year.
Yeah, these pictures really do kind of talk about, you know, what looking for and identifying in a sample. So this is a particularly challenging weed. It's a warm season perennial, whereas like crabgrass is a warm season annual. It dies when we have frost. This guy just goes dormant when we have frost. This is nimblewill. So it's coming back every single year. It goes dormant like buffalo grass would or zoysia grass would in the fall, and then when we get some heat next summer, it will start to regrow. And because it's a warm season grass, it's got an advantage over our cool season grasses like our tall fescue and our bluegrass. So it starts to spread. So if we're trying to control this weed, you know, one of our options is a non-selective control, which would something we'd use this time of year. There's not a lot of cultural things we can do to try to control it once it's there. Another option, if you don't want to do non-selective, kill everything and reseed in the fall, is in the spring using something like again that Pilex, that tenacity. Those are products that are going to be able to control this, but it has to be applied really early. So as it's coming out of winter and it's been weakened by that winter, then that the plant it's that herbicide prevents it from recovering and then eventually dies off. So if you have that, probably something you might want to reach out to a professional to see if they can have that sprayed out early next summer.
And if you try to pull it, all you do is make it mad. And
yeah, you can't just pull it. It's got a lot of stolons there, so you're going to pull it and it's just going to aggressively fill back in to fill that space. So that's not a real successful control strategy.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, Amy, this is an Omaha viewer, and I think he speaks for a lot of people who have clematis. Starting to see some dead stems and some sort of funny coloration in the foliage. One of them, he said, died all the way back to the ground. Then he's seeing some new growth. He's starting to see the same symptoms in the other.
Okay.
So diseases or environment or both?
It's probably a combination of both. Just like the Forsythia, clematis don't get a ton of disease issues, but if you're in that Omaha area, you have received an excessive amount of rain at particular times during the year. Since it's dying back, one thing I would really want you to look at is look at the stem of your clematis, especially that vine, and see if there's any brown discoloration or blackish discoloration, which can indicate a fungal infection that's causing a girdling, and that's the reason why we're seeing that dieback. If you are seeing that girdling, the best thing to do is going to be to trim out that vine or that stem of clematis and remove it, because it's not going to recover, and all you're doing is you're providing inoculum for next year if we have another wet season for that fungus to continue to grow and girdle those stems and vines. The other trick is if you're not seeing any of that, just like the Forsythia, pull back the soil and the mulch from that crown area, take a look, see if you have any discoloration. Is this extremely wet? If it is extremely wet, try to dry it out as much as possible as we go into the fall months, but don't get it too dry because then it won't overwinter real well.
All right, thank you, Amy. All right, Elizabeth, this sounds like it belongs to Amy, but you're going to get it first. This is a viewer who actually asked us a question first about hydrangea and seeing some spotting on the foliage. Her second one is peony based, but let's talk about what you think we're seeing here.
So when it comes to that hydrangea, the first question I'm going to ask them is, where is this growing at? Like, is it on the south side? Is it on the west side? Is it on the north side? Because we can tell that we see out that white background or that light background, and we're probably looking at an environmental condition. We're probably looking at either scorch or we're looking at reflected heat onto that hydrangea in that spot. So we're looking for that burn back, for that browning, and we're probably getting reflected light off of the building and burning it back that way. I don't think we're dealing with anything disease. I think we're looking at something environmental.
All right, and the peony, we've had a lot of questions about peonies, a little bit of spotting that might fall to Amy, but what about environment or fall cleanup issues with peonies? You
know, peonies, if you were in those areas that got a lot of rain, or now we're starting to see that powdery mildew really come on, we're going to start to see those peony foliage begin to fade, and they're going to start to turn yellow, and that's natural. So what we want to do is when that foliage begins to fade, what we want to do is we want to cut it back and we want to remove it, just so we don't have an inoculant source for next year. But like I said, we want to wait for it to fade on its own and turn yellow on its own before we remove it. What it's doing is it's putting energy back into the crown, and we want a good flower show come next year, so we want as much energy to be stored in that crown as possible.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, our backyard farmer garden has just been fantastic this year. Great help from the master gardeners, of course. What we are discovering is some of you have come to try to find us and you haven't been able to. So let's take a minute to tell you how you can come visit the backyard farmer garden, and we will welcome every single one of you.
This week in the Backyard Farmer, we're going to visit the garden. We're going to tell you exactly how to get here. The Backyard Farmer Garden is located on East Campus, kind of right in the middle. We're just east of Kime Hall. Any campus map you can find Kime Hall and just walk up the hill from there. Not very far from both the dairy store and the student union. So if you need a cup of coffee or an ice cream cone, you can grab those and you can walk through the garden and enjoy. The garden is open 24/7, 7 days a week. It is easiest to park on East Campus on the weekends. It takes about an hour to walk through the garden. Master gardeners are here on Saturday morning, so if you want a little mini tour, be sure to stop by. Master gardeners will be happy to answer all of your questions. They're also here on Tuesday nights for the Grow Row. So if you have your extra produce and you want to drop that off, you can drop that off Tuesday nights from 5 to 7, and they'll also be able to help answer all of your questions. So now you know where the Backyard Farmer Garden is. Know that you can get here. Please visit and check it out.
And if it's a really hot day, stop at the dairy store first or last. Nothing like university ice cream.
Or both.
Or both. Or many times. Yeah. All right, so just a regular round here of questions pretty quick. Jonathan, this first is a viewer in Papillion. The ash is dropping leaves, doing a little bit of dieback in the crown. They're wondering, should that tree be treated now for emerald ash borer?
Okay. No, I would not go out and do any ash treatments for emerald ash borer right now. You can hold off until next spring. Even if it was EAB, your tree is still in plenty of good health that it can be treated next year. You can hold off and get that scheduled this fall. Go ahead and schedule it with your arborist, but then wait to do it next spring.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Bill, the questions are starting to come in about, is it time to treat the lawn for wild violets and or dandelions? Are we in that window yet?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit early on that window. So we generally want to make those applications when we're starting to get near frost. And so right now it's still pretty warm. It's cooler than average, but it's still a little bit warm. We're probably going to want to wait closer to frost, and then those plants will start moving sugars to the roots, and then that herbicide will also be moved down, and we'll get a much more complete kill. So a little bit more patience, but it's great to have it in your top of your mind.
All right, thank you, Bill. Amy, we have a viewer who had a prairie fire crabapple. We did diagnose fire blight. She's wondering what is the long-term effect on fire blight on the tree. What should she do about that?
It depends on how severe your case was. If it was really severe and you had to prune back a lot of branches, back those 8 to 12 inches, long-term it's probably not real good because you took a lot of foliage away from that tree. If it was a minor foliage removal, just wait and see. You're going to have to give that tree a year or two to see if we're going to have continued fire blight issues. But at the same time, it's not going to survive 10 years. So depending on the age of your tree, this would be a great time to maybe consider replacing it if you want to replace it. But it's not going to last 10 to 15 years, I can guarantee that.
All right, and Elizabeth, you actually have a crabapple question as well, which is, this viewer was told not to prune the suckers off earlier in the season, but should they go ahead and do that now, and can that be a permanent cure for a suckering crabapple?
They can go ahead and prune those off. As soon as they have foliage on, go ahead and prune off the suckers around the base. Unfortunately, certain tree species are really prone to suckering, and crabapples is one of them. So it's not going to be a long-term thing. They're going to have to do it on a regular basis. Now, there are some products on the market like Finale and Sucker Stopper. They're on the market. They don't work extremely well in some instances, and so you're gonna have to read on the label. If as long as it's a crab apple, you can go ahead and use those products. If it's an eating apple, then you're not able to use it on that type of a plant. But they can go ahead and continue to cut them off, but they're gonna have to fight them for a long time, till it gets fire blight.
Mark, We have a lot of good stuff coming up on Backyard Farmer, but we're going to go right now to Plant of the Week, Elizabeth.
Yes, and these Plant of the Week actually came from the Raising Nebraska Outdoors piece. And there's some really cool ones, I think so anyway. So the really pretty lime and orange ones are a zinnia. They are, oddly enough, named Queenie Lime Orange. That's right. Took a hint from an entomologist right there. So with these zinnias, these are a fully double zinnia, and they have both the lime and the orange coloration on them. These are an All-America selection, so the All-America selections are bred for unique flower forms, for disease resistance. And so this guy is not only a fun color and disease resistant, but it also has a long vase life. And so with these guys, they can stay alive in the vase of just plain water without a preservative for a long time. They also are kind of a stout zinnia. They don't look like they're gonna fall over in the wind or anything like that, so they're really good branching structure. Now the other one on the back side, some of you might think is actually a crop, which you would be right. What it is this is the Jade Prince millet. So the University of Nebraska has a really good breeding program with the ornamental millet. So if you've heard of Purple Majesty, and then we've also got Copper Prince, there's Jade Princess. So we have all sorts of good colors on this one, and this one's the Copper Prince. So the foliage is this kind of coppery green and coloration to it. And then the seed head here is this really unique form. It's a really straight up spike. And so that's the fun one with that one. And then we add these two color combinations together with the spike of the Copper Prince. And then we also have the Queenie Lime Orange Zinnia. And they're just a couple of really nice plants. And so we had to give the plug to our breeding program at UNL for this really fun millet.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I do like those colors together. All right, Jonathan, you have a couple of pictures that are oak.
Oaks, okay.
This is an Ogallala viewer. It's about 4 years old, has these odd spots on the leaves and fuzzy bumps.
Okay.
He opened the fuzzy areas, didn't see anything, but what is it? Any notion on this one?
So it looks like and sounds like he's dealing with some galls. Oaks get over 800 different species of galls on them, usually caused by a wasp, sometimes by a fly. But these insects, they sting the plant or they bite into the plant, and their saliva or some secretions that they create with their ovipositor will make the plant form this tumor around them, essentially. The gall is this expanded area where they can live and feed and not get harmed. So it's just a cosmetic issue. This one looks like a flake gall on the bottom of the oak leaf. In the other picture, I think maybe jumping oak gall or probably also flake oak gall. There's so many of them, it's just hard to keep track of all the different oak galls. So not something that we really need to worry about.
All right, and then your second one is also an odd tree picture for this one. And this viewer is, this is a red sunset maple.
Okay.
She said she really didn't see any insects. We did have another picture that was a little closer up.
Okay.
It looked like maybe some lace bugs, but this is not lace bugs, we don't think.
I don't think that this is lace bugs. Based on this far away picture that we're looking at here, my guess would be hopper burn caused by potato leafhopper. Despite their name, they like to feed on maple trees. They ride up from the Gulf Stream and the Gulf of Mexico into states like Nebraska and other parts of the Great Plains and Midwest. And when they feed on the tree, they suck juices out. They leave behind these curled leaves and that kind of burnt looking area with some yellow foliage. You might try a dinotephuron spray on the trunk next year. It'll be systemically translocated throughout the plant, and that will take care of those potato leafhoppers for you.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, you have sort of a good lawn, bad lawn situation going up here. Bill, this viewer says she's got 3 areas of the lawn that keep getting worse every year. The first is, you know, the good lawn.
Looks great.
And then her second and third ones are these patchy sorts of things, and the lawn just keeps getting worse and worse. So those next couple of pictures are what in the world is going on with this patchy stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to tell from here. So we see there's weeds there, but I'm guessing a lot of those weeds are just coming in because the lawn is not being able to really outcompete them, and so they're filling that void. It looks kind of droughty, so we could think something from like an insect perspective. It could be a disease, and so from this picture, from this view, it's really difficult to say exactly what that could be. It also could be even some of the the weeds that look really good in the spring and the fall, like rough bluegrass, that then start to thin out and die when it's hot, becomes hot out. And so that would be one you probably want to send the sample to the plant diagnostic lab, and they're going to be able to get you a much better diagnosis. So then once we know what it is, we can devise a plan to address it instead of just trying to spray a bunch of things and hoping. It's always better to get a good diagnosis first, so that you're not wasting money, you're not putting unnecessary pesticides and inputs onto your lawn.
All right, good advice. Thank you, Bill. All right, Amy, we have a couple of viewers that sent us images of evergreens with issues. The first one, this one is about 40 years old. It's a spruce, seems to be dying. I think we have 2 or 3 pictures of this one showing trunk and needle damage on this one. What do you think here?
So we've been getting a lot of images on spruce. This one, I'm not seeing a lot of discoloration of the needles. With that in mind, I would probably take a closer look at the branch, at the trunk, to see if you have any major weeping going on or any sunken in cankers. Cytospora canker is a huge one on spruce that would cause some major problems. On this picture, you see that little green stuff. That's nothing to worry about. That is lichen. Lichen is a symbiotic animal or plant with the tree. It just uses the tree as a home. It doesn't go into the tree. It doesn't cause any damage to the tree. If you get lost, you can use lichen to determine if you're on the north or the south side.
All right, and then this fourth one, Amy, is also a spruce that happens to be up in Minnesota. The viewer lives in Omaha. Seeing this browning going on, again, she doesn't say there's anything insect-based, Jonathan.
Right.
So what do we think here?
Okay. This one, if you take a closer look, it looks a little more purple in color. I would want to check it for rhizophyra needle cast. With that, if you flip the needle over, you're going to have all the stomates. You're going to see little black dots all in a row, and that is the fungus coming up through the stomate. The other big trick with this being up in Minnesota, depending on where you purchased the tree, is there any root girdling that is occurring on this little tree? When you planted it, it's not very big. Did you make sure you spread out those roots properly and we're not getting girdling? And was it a happy tree when you first got it? So it could be a combination of some root girdling and potentially some environmental issues too.
All right, thank you, Amy. All right, Elizabeth, these sound like they belong to Amy, but they're trees. And starting with the first one, says some sort of strange brown goop coming out of it. This tree looks like it's in kind of a compromised planting situation anyway. He wonders what it is. Will it die? Is it spreading to something else? And I think we have a couple pictures of these. This one, should he quarantine it? And there's the brown goop. I think that looks like a Siberian elm.
Yep, that's one of the elms, and if you take a look, it is planted in an inferno strip, and some of the roots have been cut off in that area because of the sidewalk. So what it is it has a fungal infection called wetwood, oddly named. And so what it's gonna do is every year it's just gonna continue to weep in that spot. There'll be elms that will live for a long time with this wetwood in there. And so I wouldn't worry about removing that tree unless you see some other issues. Now this maple, on the other hand, that we're taking a look at right now, yes, I would remove that maple without hesitation. The reason for that is it appears to be some type of silver maple. Anytime we see the rot inside, it's not going to get any better. It's only going to continue to eat out that heartwood. And the side that the damage is on is opposite the house. So if we get a wind, the weak side is going to make it snap off and it's going to go toward the house. And so with that maple, we'd go ahead and remove it as soon as we possibly could. I know it casts some good shade, but it's going to be a hazard down the line. The elm, on the other hand, you can go ahead and leave that guy in for a few more years and it'll be just fine.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, during the season, we've been trying to give you some tips on what you should be doing during certain months of the year. As we go into the fall of the year, it is really time for us to talk about what to do in your landscape beds and your garden areas. So here to tell us about fall sanitation, we have Jeff Culbertson.
One of the terms that you hear frequently on Backyard Farmer is the term sanitation. So it could be used by any member of the panel at any point in time, talking about removing insect damage or insects, disease, parts of plants, weeds, broken or dead branches from a plant. So we use it a lot on the show, referring to or using that term in several different ways. So one of the things we'll look at is doing some garden sanitation now that we're going into fall. So one of the first things we'll look at are really kind of the easy one, and that is looking through your landscape, be it a tree or a shrub or perennial, and looking for parts that just are no longer growing, that have died for whatever reason. And clearly, if there's not an obvious disease symptom going on here, then we don't have to worry about that sort of concern. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But something like this, we can come in, easily remove the dead portions as we can see them now while we still have green leaves on the plant. And that part of your work will be done for the year. Part of this process also is going through your landscape in your garden and looking for these late season weeds. If you haven't done a lot of weeding in the last month or so, this is a good time to get in there, get all those weeds cleaned out, really probably for the last time for the year. So this is the last real big weeding job you're gonna have to do for the year. And then we'll collect all this material and get it out of the landscape. One of the biggest challenges with some of our landscape sanitation is what are we gonna do with something that's infected with a disease or has some sort of serious pest issue, an insect issue. So for many of these things, like this crabapple here, the recommendation is from our pathologist and our entomologist is to remove the plant material once it falls. So as these leaves come to the ground, we'd rake these up and clear them, take them from the site so we don't reinfect the tree again and again. So we want to try to do that as best we can to help prevent disease going forward. So to review, as we go through our garden, the first thing we want to look for is any dead branches, anything that's died back on the trees or shrubs. Second, we're going to go through and pull some weeds, make sure we get the weeds cleaned up. And then thirdly, we're going to look at anything that may have disease. So leaves, we looked at some crab apples, some different things like that that may have some disease on it. And then how do we deal with this stuff once we have it? So there's a couple things we can do. If it's larger branches, we can certainly take it to the local landfill if they're grinding mulch, someplace that processes that material. If it's smaller material, you may be able to compost it. So there's a couple different composting methods. One is the hot compost, so something that gets above 160 degrees, which can be difficult for a home composter, unless you really know what you're doing, has done a little research on that. And that process will help kill pathogens, kill seeds, that sort of thing. If you're like most of us, you're probably doing a longer term compost. So we'll call that a cold compost. And that is something where you will compost this material for a longer period of time, at least a year, that you'll have it in a compost pile to let that material completely break down. And certainly my recommendation for that is not to put a lot of material with seeds in it into the compost. So if you have weeds that have big seed heads, I'd remove the seed heads and put the rest of the material into the compost, that sort of thing, so we don't have to worry about those seeds germinating in our garden at a later date.
Thanks, Jeff, for those tips. Here we are at State Fair. Thanks to our audience for showing us the love. We do want to make sure that as we're going into the fall of year, that scouting around as the weather is getting cooler, it makes it a lot more fun, and you really can do a lot of sanitation that helps avoid insects and rots and spots next year. All right, Jonathan, on the insect note, we have a viewer from Omaha who sent us a couple of images of insect eggs. She wants to know what those were because, of course, we've had some eggs on before.
Sure.
Yeah.
Eggs are so tough. What I really want to do is just go visit her, get the eggs, and raise them as if they were my own so that I can figure out what is inside of them. My best guess, based on what we see here and in the next image that is also from the same viewer, is that these are brown marmorated stink bug eggs. Ooh. Because that is the insect that we see here. So Occam's razor would tell me that they're probably related. There are some swamp moth caterpillar eggs that look kind of like that egg in that last picture, but I'm going to go with brown marmorated here, which is a pest of peppers and tomatoes and corn, as well as apples and a few other crops that we grow. They're also a problem because they get into the house in the fall and winter time and smell really bad and stain drapes and wallpaper, and people can have allergic reactions to them. So if you're seeing them in your landscape, make sure you do some pest proofing so that nobody can get inside. If you do find a few in the house this winter, vacuum them up or sweep them outside, and then they will freeze to death and you won't have to worry about them.
And this is a relatively new pest.
It is. It's an invasive species, and we're one of the newer states to receive it.
All right, aren't we lucky?
Oh, always so lucky.
Always so lucky. All right, Bill, you have a couple of different what's wrong with my turf questions. The first is an 1.5 acres in Omaha.
Okay.
It's never been this bad. He does say the area that is shaded is lush and green. It's mostly bluegrass. He's wondering whether aeration and overseeding will help in the severely damaged areas, or should he sod?
Yep.
And then the second one is a Lincoln viewer who has this interesting sort of pattern going on in the lawn.
So the second image here is that dollar spot that I was talking about before. So this is what it looks like. Again, it's a foliar pathogen. All the humidity and rain that we've had and the cooler, not really hot temperatures has been really conducive. And you'll notice too, you'll see it looks like cobwebs on the top. That's the mycelium from that fungi as it's spreading and killing off those leaves. Again, it should be disappear as we dry out this fall. If you really can't tolerate it, most of our lawn disease products will work to control this. First picture, there could be a bunch of different things going on. I'm noticing that areas next to the sidewalk seem to have more damage, so I think about heat issues. But there's a whole bunch of different pests that could potentially be causing this. So it's really impossible for me to really say exactly what that is in that picture. Second picture, those dollar spots. So I got one of two, I guess.
You can go pick up on that grass and see if there are grubs underneath or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks like having that wilted appearance. You would think that that's what it could be, but again, it could be that. It could be Pythium. It could be another weed. It could be a lot of issues, and just want to know what that is before we recommend anything.
Should he aerate and seed?
Yeah, you could definitely go in and aerate and seed. If it comes back, it comes back. But if it doesn't come back and we have that seed there, then we're at least going to have grass for next year. So it's not going to hurt to do aeration and seeding.
All right, thanks, Bill. Okay, Amy, this is serendipitous, if you will, your next picture. This is actually a gardener who's been gardening for 30 years in Cedar Bluffs. She has potatoes with a fungus among us, and this is the picture of the outside, and then she has sent us a picture of the inside.
Inside too.
Yeah.
So I showed earlier in the show corky scab. This is actually more of a powdery scab, which makes no sense whatsoever in the name, but the inside of the potato looks perfectly fine. Powdery scab is going to give us a lot of those pits, and that's what you're seeing in the first picture. They're fairly deep. Sometimes they can easily get confused with wireworm or grub damage, but they don't go into the tuber. These are going to be ones that, just because they look pretty gnarly, you're just going to peel those out when you're preparing your potatoes. It's in the soil. You may not have it next year depending on how the weather conditions are on that soil. But with these pits, the one thing you want to be careful with is long-term storage, because they do go into that tuber. It allows an opportunity for fusarium to get in there, and we can have fusarium dry rot along with some of the bacterial diseases. And the bacterial diseases are the ones that's going to do the soft rot, so you reach into your bin of potato and you get that squishy one, or they really start to stink. That'll be bacterial. Don't want those around, so you want to make sure you dry your tubers out and you're checking your tubers on a regular basis. Fusarium dry rot I'm not as concerned about. For causing a smell, you'll just have to peel out or dig out that portion of the tuber that is infected.
All right, and the mere thought of that smelly potato just, our skin is crawling, the whole audience.
There's nothing worse than a stinky tater.
All right, Elizabeth, your final picture for the evening is, this is a viewer who planted a Crimson Queen weeping small Japanese maple in 1990. And it has clearly decided it wants to live partway over the sidewalk. His question is whether he can move this tree.
So first off, when we talk about siting a plant, we need to site a plant for the mature size, because this can happen and it will eat the house and the sidewalk. So this tree, you could try to move it. Unfortunately, I don't think you're going to be very successful. And so what you could also try to do is selectively try to prune it back and try to make it smaller. Again, it's not going to be the best result either way, but you're still going to be able to keep that lovely Japanese maple there for a little bit longer if you wanted to. So like I said, you could move it, you could try to selectively prune it, or you could just take it out and try something different.
Yeah, and those darn plants just won't read the book.
They don't read the tag.
I know, exactly. Well, we do have great announcements of fun things going on in the gardening world as always. First is us tooting our own horn. We will be on location at Midwest Hop Producers on Wednesday, September 12th. Q&A is at 5:15. We tape at 6 p.m. and that will be, we have an address on the screen. There is no ticket required. So that is open to the public. We expect to have a really rousing time. The second is, of course, Grow a Row. You can still donate your produce Tuesdays from 5 to 7 p.m. Central Time in the Backyard Farmer Garden. That is really a great opportunity. We do distribute that to places that need the food. So really excellent. All right, so we go to regular questions next. This one actually is pretty interesting, Jonathan. This is a viewer who lives in East Bellevue near the forest.
Okay.
She's seeing a lot of empty bagworm bags on the driveway. She's wondering, does that mean the birds are getting the worms? The early bird is getting that worm?
It could be somebody has been preying upon some of those bagworms. It could also be that the male bagworms have emerged from those bags and all that's left is the empty bag. So with bagworms, only the male comes out as a fully grown moth. The female spends her entire life in the bag as sort of a mega super caterpillar after she pupates, and she never leaves. So it could be one or two of those things, yeah.
All right, excellent. Never, in either case, no worm in the bag.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. All right, Bill, so let's talk about real quickly whether it is time to fertilize and fall seed. Are we in that window?
We are definitely in that window. So this is the seeding window. If you are going to seed, make sure you use a starter fertilizer. You don't need to soil test. You just always need to put a starter fertilizer down. And so if you're going to do that, look for a fertilizer that has a high middle number. That's a starter fertilizer. And you want to try to get about 1 pound of that middle number down when you possibly can. So look at the bag. And again, for all the fertilizers, even if you're not reseeding this fall, and you're going to put some fall fertilizer down, if your spreader doesn't have a spreader setting on that fertilizer, either don't buy that fertilizer or get a new spreader, because it's really hard to just kind of figure out how much to put on. And so you want to make sure that you have a spreader that has the settings for the fertilizer that you end up buying.
All right, thank you, Bill. All right, Amy, so question for you is, as we do go into fall, are there specific things that we really should be looking for to clean up because they will be a disaster? One or two in the vegetable garden?
The one I can come up with a landscape really fast is roses. Make sure you prune back your roses. Look for any of the cankers that we get from black spot. This is a great time as we start to defoliate to remove those canes completely before we go into the winter months and remove any of that dead foliage around our roses for black spot for next year.
All right, thank you, Amy. Elizabeth, we had a viewer who asked us in the spring about moving a Russian sage and was told to move it in the fall. So is this fall, or how early, how late do we want to move Russian sage, and is that actually an easy thing to do?
I don't think you can kill Russian sage, even if you wanted to.
I can.
Oh, well, never mind. Kim can kill it. But it is a pretty hardy perennial, and with that, you want to make sure that it's going to be cool enough out that you're able to water it and keep ahead of it, because you're going to rip out a bunch of its root system when you transplant it and move it. So, you know, I would wait a little bit longer. You want to give it some time to get established before we get to winter. Now, when's winter going to hit? Your guess is as good as mine, because we all live in Nebraska. So I would go ahead and think about moving it in September, get the water on it, get it established. If you wanted to move it in spring, you can move it in spring too. It's pretty hardy. It's always going to send up those little daughter plants, and you can always steal some of those little daughter plants or suckers from the side.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Jonathan, you have 5 seconds to answer this question, which is spider webs all over the shrubs in the front yard. What to do about it?
Let them be. They're just there eating bugs, so there's nothing to really worry about with those. You can try and brush them off, but they'll just come back.
I like the broom. Yeah. I like the broom.